All
Hello,
right.
everybody. How are you?
So let me introduce you, Kurt.
Okay.
Give you a formal introduction. Kurt Heidegger is a PhD, is the executive director of Biotic Citizen Incorporated, a nonprofit educational institution that specializes in peripatetic field environmental philosophy. It operates schools in West Hampton, New York City, Los Angeles, and Valparaiso, Chile. Biocitizen teachers bring students outdoors to read the landscape and consider how their own lives fit into the natural and cultural narratives they find. Kurt is co-author recently of Tracing Darwin's Path in Cape Horn that details how discovered evolution when he met the indigenes of the southernmost tip of the Americas, the Yagan people?
Yep.
His lecture for Wisteria Hearst draws upon decades of local and regional knowledge he has acquired through scholarly and field studies and is part of a biocultural history of our region entitled Transcendental Northampton. Please help me welcome Kurt Heidegger.
Well, thank you very much, Penny. And I am a resident of this area only for 15 years, and I have a sneaking suspicion that there are members of the audience that are going to know more about certain aspects of the topics that I'm going to bring up. And that's why if you feel like you have some information that could be helpful, please share it. And also, if you have some questions, please ask them, because this is a giant subject. The simple topic really is, how did the Holyoke Dam get there? And it leads all over the place. I hope you can see the screen. This is my favorite image of the...
So you're not sharing screen yet.
All right. So I'm already having a technical difficulty.
It's okay.
Mainly because I can't somehow get back off the full screen that I opened.
Ah.
So do you mind if let's see, if I kind of log into Zoom again?
Can you minimize your screen?
Let me see if I can find you. That I'm having a difficulty doing, actually.
Do you have an escape key?
Upper right corner. Upper right corner.
The upper right corner.
View.
You see that I don't have access to that. I have a full screen, and that's all I can see.
Oh.
Do you have an escape key?
Actually, I don't.
Oh. How about?
This is a Mac.
Yeah. Alt tab.
Can you? All right. So now I can see Boyd Kennard's here. Hello, Boyd. How are you? I'll go back to share screen again.
Yes.
Desktop 1.
There we go.
All right.
And now you just have to pick your browser.
So now you're seeing complete chaos.
Yes.
Okay. Are we back?
There we go.
Can you see this? Thank you very much for your patience.
Perfect.
I am definitely not a millennial. I can barely hang on to this technology. So this is just a funny image from 1940 of somebody spearfishing down at the bottom of the Holyoke Dam. And on the other side, you're looking at South Hadley side there. And I think they called this the Texon building.
Correct.
But can you see the arrow that I've got?
Yes.
This is a fish ladder, and Boyd Kennard can, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this is one of the fish ladders that was created that looks kind of like an exit ramp for a highway or something. And we'll discuss that in a second. That was more of just a hello and an entrance into the subject. What Biocitizen is, I think, is important to start with, because the school that I teach for and help direct has a unique perspective that will inform where I'm coming from the entire time. And we get this perspective from a conservationist whose name is Aldo Leopold, who started the Wilderness Society and published a book called the Sand County Almanac that had in it this concept called the Biotic Citizen that I was very interested in. And the idea is that we're citizens of the United States, right? And people are citizens of other nations, but we're also citizens of the planet on large. And bio means life, of course. Biotic means that which has life. So I like this idea of a citizen of life a long time ago. And in my work as a scholar and a teacher and everything, and as an environmentalist, I found this a very interesting way of accessing ideas that I couldn't access otherwise. And when you're a regular citizen, we have our history like Abraham Lincoln and the Revolutionary War and everything like that. It's a very much a human narrative. And so we would call that cultural history. When you're an ecologist and a scientist, you're into a different type of history. And so the biological history, Leopold was really interested in having that told as part of every story, that human beings don't just, have their own history, that we're co-inhabiting the planet, obviously, with other creatures that have their history, and our interactions actually define us. And so biocultural history is as simple as sushi, right? The moment you say sushi, all of a sudden you're thinking of a certain culture, right? You're thinking of a certain part of the planet. You've got a flavor. You've got different kinds of utensils that you'll use to eat sushi. And so I like this idea of biocultural history. And I also love this thing he had called the land ethic, where he said a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of a biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. So that's kind of loaded, but really it's a statement of ethics, which is really a system of what is right and wrong. And he's saying, and then he has that concept of the biotic community, which I thought was really interesting. And so I'll just read a little bit more. A bio-citizen, which is what he called the biotic citizen, enacts this land ethic, the sense of what's right and what's wrong every day. And these are his words. By behaving as a plain member and citizen of a biotic community that includes soils, waters, plants, animals, or collectively the land. So ecology teaches us that everything around us is alive. And that's different than environmentalism. And that's why this very much appealed to me, because environmentalism can be about tailpipe emissions and all that really technocratic stuff, that it becomes so distant from the things that actually make me care about life and about why I love the outdoors and why I love clean water, et cetera, et cetera. And I also like this idea that he had that we are in a kind of democracy with all the other creatures that we co-inhabit the planet with. And this is a metaphor, obviously. If you continue to really work it out, it kind of falls apart because the crows aren't voting. It's not really a democracy. It's more of just a sense of having respect for the other creatures and also paying them mind, and the birds are looking at us all the time, and we should look at them. We have people that do, but we should all be aware that the creatures around us are actually maybe even sending us messages. Our dogs certainly do. It's not anything new for us to find out that animals want to communicate with us. So Leopold opened up a whole area of inquiry and study and wonder that I was not getting in academia. And that's where Biocitizen came from. It came from being outdoors with students, with ecologists. I have a background in literature and writing. So I started hanging around with people who really knew about nature, and they do field studies. So I'd go out in the field with them, and they would be doing their benthic invertebrate collections, and those are the bugs in the river, or they'd be netting birds or something. And I was really never a scientist, but there are always questions that are raised in the field because you're witnessing things and people are talking to each other and they're asking each other questions and they're sharing stories. And I like this. And it dawned on me that this must have been kind of what Aristotle did back at the Lyceum. So why not just go for it and start a walking school? Because we live, all of us, in a unique biocultural region of the planet. We do, and the Holyoke Dam is part of it. But one of the things that arose out of this incubator of our valley here in the central Connecticut River watershed was Nursery School. It began, the first nursery school was in Northampton, and I knew about that. A guy named George Bancroft started them, brought them over from Germany. And I was like, we really need this, I think, that we need to get people outdoors so they can actually just see where they live and they know where their water comes from, maybe. You drive by Mount Tom, at least I do, because I'm on this side and I see the red cliffs. How many people actually ever go stand under the red cliffs? You could drive by them your entire life and maybe never even go and stand underneath one and find out that on an August day, it's about 150 degrees there, below those cliffs. It's an oven, and that there are rattlesnakes, and that there's even prickly pears here and there. So that somehow we have a narrow strip of a desert microbiome in the midst of everything, and so we call this field environmental philosophy, and I work with other people on this new approach to teaching history and science together as an experience that enhances indoor school learning, book learning. And so that's what you'll see a little bit in a second. We have a process that's called Wonder, Connection, Stewardship, which is kind of our learning curve. And you might have heard of the term biophilia that E.O. Wilson coined, which is the love of living things. I think everybody really does have an innate attraction to butterflies, for example, flowers, even the Grinch that Stole Christmas had a dog, that we just love life. And so the first stage for our students is really just to enjoy being outside and not being hemmed in the house, and also, being told to do this or that, or having peer pressure, or, not being great on the sports team or whatever. There's a self that's waiting for us. And I think we all know this. When you go for a walk, after about 5 minutes in a quiet place, all of a sudden you find a different part of yourself. And things begin to become less complicated in many ways. You get some clarity. You begin to notice that the world that you live in is much bigger than you are. It's not, just I live at One Stage Road in West Hampton. That the world is bigger than my house, my computer, and that could be enough for many people. Just that. The next stage is connection, where we have students that walk around with us enough that they begin to recognize what we call some of the biocultural history, the ecological features of our region, and also the historical features. And so the Holyoke Dam becomes, for us, an outdoor classroom in that way. where we go into the rivers all the time in the summertime because it's nice to swim in them, but that's also where all the life is. And the students, after a while, see maybe garbage or somebody spray painting on something, and they'll ask, why did they do this? Why is somebody messing up such a beautiful place? Why are there broken beer bottles everywhere? And that's where connection comes in, where they're like, we have to take care of this. We can't just enjoy this. This is our home. And whatever we're doing to this place, we're actually doing to ourselves. And that's where that final stage comes in, the stewardship phase, where what can we do to help? So if you will indulge me, I'd like just to give you a sense of what Biocitizen is by watching 3 short videos. The first one is wonder, the second one is connection, and the third one is stewardship. This is from Los Angeles. Did you hear that? Is that audible or not?
Biocitizen class program is a really cool program where kids of a lot of ages gather up with Biocitizen staff and head on 2 to 3 night backpacking trips.
It challenges you, which I feel like you expect life is going to be very easy, but it's not. And I think it's great that we get to go out in the nature, see great views, go on hikes, and challenge ourselves.
We summited a mountain and we took some long hikes, and it may seem scary at first, but before you know it, I'll be out here in places you never even thought were reachable.
Every time you go to a trip, it's a different experience. I feel like we've grown and learned a lot.
All right. So what you're seeing is we're not just like a bird watching school, that these kids are actually having a physical, emotional, learning experience that's also existential. So even those young kids were expressing the philosophical ideas, and we encourage them because it seems to happen naturally. We don't have to teach them to want to try to figure things out and to push themselves. So it's really fun. And here's my friend Clayton English, Sarah English.
I was searching for a camp because all my friends had the camp that they went to during the summer. And I found Biocitizen not 3 years ago. And after the first day, I knew it was the right camp, and I knew I wanted to keep doing it. Now I've been doing it for 3 years, going on 4.
So there's what we would call the connection. That he was a boy when I met him, now he's a young man. We walk around for a few years, and all of a sudden he starts to become a leader and starts to teach younger kids the things that he knows. And everybody who teaches know that you actually don't know anything in a sense until you have to teach it, because all of a sudden you really have to know what it is you're teaching. And so it's really great to see somebody like Clayton. You could even hear in his voice, as he said, he's a little unsure, because Biocitizen is kind of weird. It's not like the soccer camps or anything. And then here's Asher Davis, and this is part of the Living River School that we have that I'll conclude with. We're at the Rock Dam up in Montague, and this is just a moment of chaos that's typical of like what we do in the field.
You see this? These are the gills. They have how
How
many?
did it die?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 gills. And see this mouth? You guys ready? Look at that.
How did it die?
It probably just croaked. I don't even know.
I'm sorry, that cracks me up all the time, because he didn't know, Asher Davis did not know, but Boyd told him after that, and that basically the lamprey had lived its life and had laid its eggs right there at the rock dam, and now was going to be eaten by other creatures. All of those nutrients that it brought from the ocean, which are really important, they're like microchemicals, they're going to be absorbed by creatures. And so that's it. Wonder, connection, stewardship. That's what we do. We always go to the river, and the Atlantic salmon was the keystone species for any of the conservationists working on the Connecticut River for a couple of decades, probably from the 60s until 2012, when they were actually declared extinct. So all the schools and governors and politicians and families that would go to the Barrett fish lift at the Hadley Holyoke Dam would be introduced to the amazing life of the Atlantic salmon, and also the heroic struggle that people were making, including the dam operators especially, to help them to survive. And the salmon globally is considered a very special species. It's extremely beautiful. It lives a dramatic life of being way out in the ocean, and it swims back to its birthplace, which is upstream in freshwater, and goes over the biggest falls ever. The falls at Holyoke and Hadley were somewhere around 60 feet high, and that's the biggest in the whole river, and they had no trouble getting up them. So why not choose the salmon as a keystone species? And so part of my interest in salmon, period, come from teaching with Biocitizen, but also I was, believe it or not, a recording engineer in New York City during the 80s, and ended up in Stockholm, Sweden in 1989, working a job there, and walked in the middle of the city just to get some fresh air, and over the bridges that are in the middle of the city, and just looked over the edge, and I saw, I mean, tens of thousands of salmon swimming in the middle of the city. And I had never seen anything so remarkable, so beautiful. I couldn't believe, because I came from New York City and always kind of considered it to be the world's like most glorified ashtray. And to see that somehow in Stockholm, they had runs of salmon going in the middle of the city, I could never forget it. And so when I came here in 2005, I was really interested to see what was happening. And of course, that meant that we brought students, like everybody else does, to the dam. And this is 2012, and these are some teenagers, and a few of them have grown up to be teachers themselves for Biocitizen. So it's another one of these stories of the school's been going long enough that the little kids end up teaching other little kids. But I hope that you've had the opportunity to go to the Barrett Fish Lift, because they put on a really professional production. It is an amazing learning experience. And if you go and see the tank where they've got the big windows, sometimes you see really amazing creatures. In 2012, here are some more students. These are younger. These are about 8 and 9 years old. The EPA and the National Fish and Wildlife Service declared that they were no longer going to continue to support the recovery plan for the Atlantic salmon. And this came as a devastating blow to the students that we had, because like I said, we went to the dam. This was the same year, you know? And so this is like May maybe, and this is July that we get this news. And so everybody was like, wait a second, they just told us that they're saving them. So this was a traumatic experience. And so here is Adia Bennett, who's now teaching for Biocitizen in Los Angeles and here, reading the Hampshire Daily Gazette. We're up at Turner's Falls Dam, and she's reading to the other students this decision, and we're all just feeling very mournful and confused and trying to come to grips with it. We have just a few minutes earlier climbed up the banks of the river onto land that is Pecumtuck land, actually. And this spot that we're sitting now is surrounded by a chain link fence. So this is biocultural history. You're looking at least at a very deep photo of kids getting an awareness of what's going on the planet in a complex way. And I'm just happy to say that we all survived that, that Adia is actually the recipient of the Thoreau Society Fellowship that's helping fund her school studies because of the work that she did that began here. You're seeing a young child's conscience awaken. And it almost brings tears to my eyes to see that picture. I can't believe I found it. Here is the basin. All right, so we have the salmon, and then we've got what the salmon used to swim up. And it's about, whoops, what did I just do? It's about 400 miles long. And I'm just trying to reduce the size. This big line here, the big red line, is where the Holyoke Dam is. So if you're looking from the Long Island Sound to that line, you're looking at about 70 miles. And you can see these big gray blobs of urban development. Hartford, the Springfield area, and then this line, and then 330 miles of available watershed for fish to get up. So imagine, well, Leopold, part of his land community idea, he would sometimes call it the land organism, which was another way of saying a superorganism, which is another way of saying that what you're looking at is a life form of some type here that's very complicated, that is co-inhabited by a lot of symbiotic creatures that are all competing and also collaborating with each other. And so we have a short term in Biocitizen that we use to describe these very extended, complicated relationships of creatures within living systems, and we call it the long body. A river is alive. And if we go all the way back up to this guy spearfishing, he's in that river because it's alive, right? He's not there because it's dead. There are fish all over the place, and he's got a spear, and who knows what he did, but he's there because this giant body somehow allows all these creatures to live. So imagine if this was our body and we cut ourselves off just above our knees, and here's the rest of our body that's never going to get any blood again. So the Holyoke Dam really has the biggest impact on all the upriver creatures than any other infrastructure that humans have built. And we're going to look at why that is the case now, because it is built on the old South Hadley Falls. They used to call it the Great Falls. Here is, well, maybe I'll just add this, that this line also demarcates two gigantic ecoregions. From here on down, it's pretty much flat and coastal, you might say. When you get above here, you get into the mountains. And we notice that, right? When we're driving, either north or south on 91 in between Mount Tom and Mount Holyoke, there's a significant difference. And that's why we see all the cities are down here and we don't see cities up here. And so this is a morphological reality that the geological, the hydrological, the climate conditions are different up here than they are down here. And there's also a cultural difference that happens too. You've got Holyoke, Chicopee, Springfield, etc. here. And then up here, you've got Northampton and Amherst, and you know that there's a cultural difference. I don't have to go into it, but it's important when we're talking about biocultural history that geology actually shapes us. It shapes cultures. And that some of the interesting things that we learn when we look at the history was that it was actually cheaper in the colonial era for people to trade with people in Boston than it was to trade in Northampton. The cost of transporting goods to Boston was half the price that it was to transport goods to Northampton. And Jonathan Edwards, who is the famous preacher and the starter of the Great Awakening, and also Transcendentalism and born again Christianity, he said in one of his most important essays that the Lord had created the land from Northampton so it could be distant from all of the corruption of the rest of the world. And really what he was talking about was South Hadley Falls, because you couldn't get the commerce from below the dam to above the dam, so that there was a much different culture. So I'm just going to show you a data sheet that you can find everywhere. This is not my métier, but this is a chart of the fish that have made it over the dam from 67 to 2017. And it really tells us that there's a lot of work that has to be done. That in a perfect world, we would see, like in the Atlantic salmon here, we're going from 0, it'd go to 1 million, but it doesn't do that because there are a lot of factors in play. And even when you see the American shad that are counted at Holyoke here, we start with like 20,000 in 67, and we end up with 500,000, but somewhere there's a bulge around 1992 where they have almost, over 1.5 million. And this is why we need to have scientists on top of this, and we need to have people watching this, because these fish will come back. That's what we have found. That's what Boyd Kennard has taught us. They will come back if we allow them to come back. And that's really our goal, is to do that. So I thought I would just put that up there, because this is a sign of care, actually, is the way that I'd put it, is that we're maybe unique in the world, as we will now see. What time is it right now? It's time for me to get moving. We are unique in actually having a history that goes back a couple hundred years of people demanding fish passage. And so that's what I'll get into right now. The falls, yes.
Kurt, can I interrupt for a second? Could you enlarge that again?
Sure. And this is going to be available too online, so you can look at it later closely if you'd like. So this is from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And these are not all the species that go up. These are the ones that are counted. There are some other species like the bass. They don't seem to really count. But we have the blueback herring seems to be having a lot of trouble these days. And for an ecologist, that's their a food species essentially. So if you lose them, then you're going to lose other creatures. And maybe I'll just, have to say this, going back to this map. As part of the life of this long body or this living river, there's a migration that would happen every year, and we know it, right? Because that's when they open up the Barrett Fishway around Mother's Day and then close it around Father's Day. The creatures from the ocean can sense that it's time to move upriver, and following these fish would be mammals and birds and reptiles and amphibians and human beings. There would be major communities following these, and we are not really able to access what that means. We're going through a paradigm shift, you might say. Our world is changing. Obviously, we know that. And one of the changes that's happening is our awareness that we actually changed the temperature of the planet. And we maybe 20 years ago didn't think that we had that ability. And maybe that's also why it's difficult for us to accept that it's going to get warmer and warmer and everything, because we've been taught that nature is so vast that we can't control it. Well, it just so happens that we have been able to control nature very well. The problem is that we haven't been doing such a great job doing it because we don't really understand how it works well enough. And we also don't understand, well, what Leopold would say, what it is to be a biocitizen. Like, where do our interests, end, and the interests of the other creatures that co-inhabit the planet, where do they enter in? And what we're finding out more and more, and I think COVID is giving us an example of this, that we are very biological creatures, that we would like to think that we have a force field around us that will protect us from everything that's happening, but that we're actually quite fragile. And get us out of our environment for a day or two. I mean, can you imagine standing outside right now for more than 2 hours without a coat on? Well, people used to do that around here. I'm not saying that I want to do that, but that we're much more fragile than we are. And part of the story that we're just about to get into is going to be this dawning awareness that the things that we thought were what we were supposed to do, they might have made sense a long time ago, but we can't actually continue to do them because what we call development is now being regarded as destruction. And so this is a dawning awareness for us. So we're going from what I'd say an industrial worldview to a biotic worldview. And it's hard for us to do this because our schools really aren't prepared to do it. We, schools are supposed to pass on civilization to the next generations, and that means passing on the past to the future. And that's one of the crises that we have right now. What from the past is relevant to what we're getting into? And well, one thing's for sure, look at clean water is always going to be necessary. You can't have civilization without it. So at the very least, this river has provided that and will provide it. There are ways that we can bring more life back, and we'll get back to that. So the Agawam apparently called the Great Falls Pawtucket, and I haven't actually been able to find any source for that except for Sylvester Judd, who wrote The History of Hadley. All of the historians that work around here will look to The History of Hadley by Sylvester Judd, which was published around the Civil War, basically, to find basic facts. His manuscripts and all the things that he collected are in the Northampton Library. And by some strange coincidence, I'm in his house right now that he lived in West Hampton, because he ran the general store. So I don't know how exactly that happened, but hello, Sylvester. And so here's a little bit of what he collected about what it was like in the pre-colonial era. When the English established themselves on the banks of the Connecticut, there was in the river and tributary streams in the proper seasons, a great abundance of shad, salmon, bass, and other fish, such as the Indians had long used for food. The falls of the rivers were great fishing places in New England for the Indians and the English. All right, so that is, we don't actually have an image of the South Hadley Falls. Maybe somebody who's listening does, but I have not been able to even find a sketch of what these falls must have looked like. So you have to imagine what you see maybe on the Nature Channel, Discovery Channel, when there's grizzly bears, like clawing salmon, you know, at the bottom of falls. It wasn't like the dam looks now. It wasn't just like this straight line. It was a bunch of humps with water swirling in between them and coming over and cascading and pooling. It was very complicated. And so this was a major gathering area for all of the creatures at these moments, especially, you know, around Mother's Day. There'd be an intense eruption of vitality, and everything would be eating and everything would be moving, and it must have been just amazing. That's all I, you know, about all I can say. But we need to imagine it. That's all I need to say too, is that somehow we have to recover what that was like, and I can't do it for this presentation. Another thing that Judd said that was very interesting was that the shad never made it above Bellows Falls in Vermont, but the salmon did. And it would also be interesting to know how far the salmon made it up. Like, did they make it up to Canada? Because who knows? And I think that there are records, but that's as many as I could find for this report. And also that they did not ascend the falls of Chicopee, the shad. So this just shows you that the salmon were just like the superhero creature, and that's why we're going to follow them. Here are some basic facts. 1636 is when Springfield is founded on Pocumtuck land. It's the Agawam clan who inhabits that area, and that's where the name Agawam comes from. But they were Pocumtucks. A few years later, in 1653, some of the people from Springfield move up above the falls to settle Northampton, where the Nawartug clan is living. And then in 1675, unfortunately, the King Philip's War occurs, and the indigenous people pretty much flee. They are either going to get killed or they run. And so a lot of them go to Housatonic, some of them go to Albany, some of them go all the way back to the coast. But unfortunately for us, we lose an amazing human community. So it's a human tragedy that happens. And any historian, there's like, it's very difficult to find out their names for the creatures, what they did, you know, and that's all I can say is that we have a big kind of empty spot, and it's unfortunate. And I think that's why I can't find the name for what Pawtucket means, for the original name. In 1685, the arguments begin over the falls, and this is now going to be the theme, and we still live with these arguments. So I think it's very healthy for people in our region to argue about the fish coming over the stream and trying to get more fish, and then the people who are using, the dam, and the people who are using the dam trying to defend themselves because they've got their own needs and they've got their own human communities. But in 1685, Springfield agrees to let people from Northampton go below the falls because that's where the fish are. And they're allowed, but that also means that they were fighting, obviously, that the people from Northampton were having fisticuffs maybe with the people in Springfield. And finally, to stop the problem, they said, all right, Northampton people, if you stay actually over on the Holyoke side, what is the Holyoke side, and the Springfield people stay on the South Hadley side, we'll all be okay. Judd says that the salmon nets began before 1700, and that people were salting them and putting them in casks for the winter, that they weren't sold. And one of the reasons that they weren't sold is that they were associated with the Pecumtucks, believe it or not. There was a cultural chauvinism going on where the Puritans would eat the shad and the bass and everything, but they refused to eat the salmon because it was below them, or maybe associated with the devil or something, which is kind of odd, because for us, the salmon is actually the favorite fish, right? And if you look, you'll find Judd was very scrupulous about putting in the price of how much the fish cost and everything. And I won't add that, but the records are there, and he established that there was an important fishery there. And that's why these fights are starting to break out. And that until around 1700, there was no need to regulate the fish, the amount of fish that were taken. But after then, there were, which signifies that it's an important business, and also that some of the fish species are being depleted. In 1720, petitions were sent to actually the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, so that they would have the right to erect weirs below the dam. And I couldn't find any images of weirs. So this is from 1585, somewhere down in Virginia. But there's a weir, which is essentially a way of using the hydrological force of the river to shoot fish into these pens. So it's a kind of aquaculture that you've got, where you can keep, if you look, you can keep fish in these pools in prisons. And so that means that you don't have to take them onto the shore, and you can keep them alive for longer. And so the petitions were actually legal writs. So this means that they're getting lawyers involved and everything. And this is it's a sign of an industry, and it's a sign of fighting. And in 1736, Brookfield petitioned Springfield to allow them to create a fish passage for shad, which is interesting, because if what Judd said is true earlier, the shad couldn't get over these falls, but they were going to try to get the shad over the falls. And this is an important moment, because this is a legal challenge. These are people upriver for the first time who are saying, you have to allow us to get fish to our communities, in the upper regions, the headwaters. And we're making a legal stink about this, but the people in Brookfield have actually no political power. And so this is a political fight that's happening. And Springfield is the most powerful city, really, on the Connecticut River. And so they flex their muscle and they say, no, we're not going to allow you to do this. The other thing I really love about this is that it shows that the people in Brookfield wanted to engineer the river to increase biotic vitality. And I think that that's a great thing. So this is 1739. This is not the United States of America. These are British people doing this. The next big event is when the proprietors of the locks and canals of the Connecticut River arrive. And this is the United States now. And they go to the Massachusetts legislature and actually get a charter passed. So this is a law that's passed that allowed them to use this Commonwealth resource for their own private gain. Now we're into the modern sphere of the environmental battles that go on the rivers. That we have a river that no one person can actually own because the river is 400 miles long, right? But we also have these private interests that make legitimate claims that are backed up by the legislature and then by the banks and by, you know, the heads of the communities to use the resource. So you'll see on their seal that they put public and private good. And that's where the battle is, always in these environmental battles. That by the law, by English common law, and also Massachusetts is a commonwealth also, that every citizen of the state of Massachusetts has an equal right to the benefits of the Connecticut River. And so granting an exception to that for private use means that whoever is using the river for private use has to prove that they are doing something for the public good. And it's something to think about, and I'll bring it up again. This is what the proprietor's mechanism looked like. This ran for only 10 years. They created a ramp on the South Hadley side and actually only dammed a part of the river, not the whole river at first, just enough so they could get forced water into a spinning wheel that was connected to large ropes that would winch this contraption up and down this ramp. And you can see actually there's like a boat in this. So they would lower this vehicle down into the river. The boat would sail onto the contraption. It would then be pulled up the ramp and then pushed off back into the river above the dam. And apparently this made national news. It was considered a technological marvel by everybody. And I think even I'm a Luddite, I would have considered it a marvel too. It was also the first major tourist attraction. I found out that people paid money just to ride up and down because it was so much fun. There was nothing like it at all. But they gave that up after 10 years. In part because of this, Northampton started to sue. And so like 1 year after they get this thing going, Northampton sues. No action is taken. 1796, Northampton sues again and says, we're actually having financial damage. It's not just that we can't cast and catch fish anymore. We have people who used to fish who are out of business. And so we want to have some redress. And the general court actually would not rule on this. It kept avoiding the issue because it was a novel issue. It had never actually been brought to court. And so they decided to ignore it in the same way the Supreme Court will ignore certain cases. We don't want to deal with it. In 1798, the first of the Turner's Falls Dam appears and blocks the entire river. And that is considered to be the extinction moment for the salmon above Turner's Falls. By just a few years later, the people of South Hadley are beginning to notice that there are less salmon and that fishery is beginning to die. And so the proprietors actually aren't that powerful. So even though the court decides not to rule, Northampton has power more than South Hadley has. And the proprietors decide, all right, we'll create a fish passage. And I don't have any images of what that fish passage was like, but this is, again, the beginning of this epic battle back and forth between the entities that are blocking the entire river for their own private purposes. And also they'll say for the purposes of commerce, versus everybody else who is really not getting any profit from it at all. Judd said that there were 14 wharves at the foot of the falls in 1801, and that sometimes they caught 1,200 fish in a single pulling of the net. So that gives you an idea of the vitality. In 1802, it's determined that the salmon is extinct. And here are some of the students from that same day in 2012, when they had read the Hampshire Daily Gazette saying that the Atlantic Salmon recovery program was over. And you can just see, you know, I think you've seen it before, but how impossible it is for fish to get up here. It's kind of obvious. In 1815, they build another dam across. The fish passage stops. Northampton sues again. 1819, finally the Supreme Court says, sorry, Northampton, you have no legal right for fish passage. However, the canal owners, the proprietors, they're struggling with their business, and they don't have a lot of political power locally, it turns out. So they agree to open up a fish passage again, even though they're not required to by law, because it's this common law principle. And it's also the people in this area who don't want to see everything dying. In 1824, their dam actually collapses. And this is the story of the South Hadley dams, is of a lot of dams collapsing. So this is just another one. They're sued, and they actually provide fish passage again. In 1829, Theodore Dwight, who was the grandson of Jonathan Edwards, writes a book about his travels through America, and actually writes something that's incredible. And here's this beautiful picture that he has from his book that I'll create a link so that people can look at these texts if they want to. But he says the pure waters formerly abounded in fish of the finest species. The salmon of the Connecticut were famous far and wide for their superior flavor, as they had ever been for their abundance. There are many places, particularly at the principal cataracts, where the Indians used annually to assemble to take away this valuable prey, and their broken implements are now to be seen in the soil in greater numbers than the fish for which they were designed have been found in the river for many a past year. An imperfect, ill-executed, and unsuccessful plan for the improvement of the navigation has excluded these valuable shoals from their favorite stream. The oversight of our countrymen is inexcusable in not adopting some simple means to render the dams in the Connecticut and its branches passable by these fine fish. So there's a real statement of a conservation ethos, and he's calling for the restoration of habitat, really, for these creatures. And so again, this is 1829, so long ago, that here's somebody that grew up in Northampton, and he's mad that the fish are all dying. And he, around that time, was a congressman also in Connecticut. And so he had some power. And I just love that picture. It's so primitive, but there's the oxbow, which is also a geomorphic emblem of our region that Thomas Coles painted. And he started the Hudson School of Romantic painting based on this image. And I think many of you know that. But it's something that we should be proud of. And in 1845, the railroads arrive. And so this is the end of the old era and the beginning of the industrial era for real. The Connecticut Railroad connects Springfield and Northampton, which means that the canals that were created are no longer really needed anymore. And so the proprietors are going to struggle for a little while, and they're going to sell themselves out to the Hadley Falls Company, which is a bunch of actually Boston bankers, essentially, who realized that they can buy the proprietor's infrastructure and grants and turn it into the city that we know now as Holyoke. When they buy it in 1847, they publish a book that contains this quote. They're proud that the charter extinguished the fishing rights existing above their present dam, so that they're very keen on not having to think about the fish and the living river ever again, that they have established the legal right to kill the fish. They build a dam and it collapses the first day of use. And there's a lot of stories about that. It became famous and notorious. They build another dam, and here's the design of it. Within 1 year to establish it, what you're looking at, this grid city. And here's the dam. This is South Hadley Canal Village is what they call it. They're diverting the flow into the first canal, the second canal, the third canal. This is essentially the architecture and infrastructure of the present day city of Hadley. I'm sorry, of Holyoke. Here is an image from Gleason's pictorial drawing room companion, which was very famous as something that people would buy like an encyclopedia. So everybody around the country and in England are looking at this marvel of the canal system. In 1850, the legislature acknowledges that something incredible is happening here. And they grant not only the right to do everything to this area that was called Ireland Flats for a long time, but they also charter stocks. So this is a company that you can actually buy stocks in. So what we're seeing now is what we might call like globalism. This is almost like a multinational corporation, and there are Dutch investors who come in to invest in this. So what we're seeing is local control acceding and retreating from this resource. And whatever Holyoke is going to become, it's going to become something that is going to be controlled by people who are not so local, who are from Boston, from New York, from Amsterdam, from wherever. And so that's part of the political history of this region, the biocultural history, because Holyoke gets a lot of muscle all of a sudden. Holyoke is created like overnight by the legislature. It didn't exist until 1850. And here's just this different kind of, this industrial worldview is within this company report. The introduction of railroads connects this valley with the other parts of the country. So no longer is it little South Hadley Village that has its own culture and its interests. Whatever's going on in Holyoke is connected to everywhere else in the country. And that's why Holyoke's important, not because it's in our valley. And so it's going from a living river where people would hang out and fish to something that is a machine. And you can see in this language that this area received the attention of capitalists in the Connecticut River, and for the establishment of mills on a large scale. And this is from the conclusion, where they're saying, basically, please invest in us. This is like an investment bulletin, this report. We have seen what was a few years ago a piece of waste land has now become an independent municipality. And so that I've circled wasteland just because it's such an amazing term, because it obviously wasn't a wasteland. from the earlier perspective, but from this perspective that is now coming in of industrial capitalism. This is land that's not being used for anything. And look, we're going to make it useful. And they describe the waters of the river as passing idly by, you know, their course, and that the river has to pay its required tribute of service. So this is a whole language of mechanical engineering values combined with we're going to make a ton of money. And there is no mention in this entire report of fish ever, the entire time. And finally, you get this promise of the future at the end. There is room for a population vastly exceeding that at present collected. Why then should not more mills be erected? And of course, that's exactly what happened. So I guess we call this boosterism. This is a part of our culture. I don't personally think there's anything wrong with industrialism, but there has to be this balance. And so we're going to return now, you know, to this conflict that the dam will always have around it between these industrial uses and this need to have a living river. From 1860, we have a map that shows the canal as it goes up the side of the river, that there are still traces of, and a park and the dam and the railroad. So basically the railroad is what destroys the canal. It is what ushers in the industrial perspective and the world that we have been inhabiting, and we have a lot of trouble imagining what the biotic world is. Two, they abandoned the canal. In 1866, the Massachusetts legislature requires a law again to require fish. I'm sorry, this is the first time to require fish passage. All right, so that's an important moment. The legislature has acknowledged that there's a problem. Here's a view of the dam that is actually a wooden dam at this point. But you can see it's very Victorian, very orderly. It looks nice. There's Holyoke over on the other side. It's not a big industrial village. Here are trains. This is a miracle. Nobody's ever seen this on the planet. In 1873, the Holyoke Water Power Company constructs a fishway that never passes fish. In 1878, observers are watching, this is from actually a Connecticut fisheries report. They're watching the salmon trying to get up and they can't get up. And there's evidently a lot of frustration because people are really sad to see these fish dying en masse. And no salmon were caught above the dam in 1878. In 1895, the legislature reverses and says, all right, I guess it's hopeless, right? So we're not going to enforce that law anymore. And by 1895, we're in the full swing of the construction of the new dam. And this is all stone and cement and bedrock, and it is actually the dam that's there today that was so well engineered. And underneath, you can see that they have blasted away the Holyoke Falls. So the South Hadley Falls, if we went to try and find them again, they're not going to be there because we have other pictures that show how much they dynamited out. So it's kind of flat under there now, whatever. And here's a picture from that same era of what it is beginning to look like. This is not, well, what was called the Texon Mill. This is called the Glasgow Gas Company. So they're taking coal and turning it into a liquid form and getting gases off of it so that they can light the streets and such. So here is the dam that we know, the stone dam, and up at the top of Mount Holyoke, you can actually see the old Mount Tom Hotel here, which was on the Grand Tour at that point, one of like the ritziest places that you could stay if you were a tourist from Boston or Hartford or New York. This is a picture from 1910 to 1930. It's still essentially the same design, where you've got a diversion that's feeding the canals and no fishway. 1938, Massachusetts reverses itself again, build the fishway. 1941, they open one, and that's it, I believe, and right there. And it never passes a fish. So another failed attempt to try and get fish up. And also we're getting into the irony, the postmodern irony, where once upon a time we had the Pecumtuck fishing and spearing fish at the bottom of the falls. And now we've got us, I guess, doing the same thing, because the fish continue to gather here in masses that are staggering even to this day. If you go down and look while the Barrett Fishway is open and stand by the side, you'll get a sense, you'll see these fish trying to get up. And that's why you'll see, 150 fishermen trying to fish at the same time to get them. And you should, because it's a living river still, and it's part of our culture. And in 1950, this is when the dam as we know it begins to appear. The company, a new company appears. What is it called? The Holyoke Dam Company appears, and the federal agencies begin to demand much more, and also the engineers of the dam demand much more out of themselves. It has to be said that the Holyoke Dam was and continues to be one of the most incredible hydroelectric engineering feats on the planet, and that the people who have worked there all along have been very keen to make the turbines as efficient as they can be. And some major inventions in the hydroelectric turbines happens there, because these guys are crack. They really care about their craft. They also want to earn more money, but they're the same people who end up starting to save the fish and start, because they actually don't want to see the fish die either. And the fish elevator is the first thing that works. And so here are some images, and I'm not going to go so deeply into this because you'll find this history at the Barrett Fishway, or you can find it online from the Holyoke Water and Power Company. But I have to hand it to them. They didn't want to kill the fish, and they don't want to kill the fish. In 1992, that's when the highest amount of the salmon and shad pass over the dam, even to this day. In 2000, there's my friend and mentor, Boyd Kennard, the endogenous fish expert who taught and still teaches at UMass Amherst, with some of the people, including his son, that now work for his company, BK Riverfish LLC, which designs fishways that work, because Boyd is a fish behaviorist. And the people who designed this were not fish behaviorists. They had no idea that fish are not going to go up like an exit ramp on a highway. Boyd, in some ways, has been the best friend and also the chief antagonist. I'm laughing because it is kind of a joke of the people that work at Holyoke. They acknowledge his expertise, and they also acknowledge that he has created solutions to problems. They're also annoyed by him because he creates a lot of work for them that is expensive and to get done. But there he is, and look at the size of that short nose, and they're going to transport that over because that is not going to make it for whatever reason on the fish lift. And that's one of the problems with the fish lift, is that it's highly technological. It requires a lot of energy. It only operates for like a month. And here's Boyd with Biocitizen students. He has the Leopoldian ethic, and I'm just going to read this as linked to an article from the Recorder. If I can get anything over to you that is of value, it's to have a conservation ethic. We must live with a conservation ethic. If we don't, we have no chance at all for survival, none, not for the fish and not for us. And so at that same day, I remember when this picture was taken by Paul Franz up there in Greenfield, he said, do you think if these fish die, do you think that we're going to survive? And the kids looked at him and they were like, and he said, we're not going to. These aren't just toys. These creatures were here when the dinosaurs were here. All right, there's a lot of other history I can tell you, but these aren't just things we look at because they're pretty or not pretty. These are what Leopold would say, they are co-travelers with us on the Darwinian odyssey of evolution. And we can't lose these creatures. You can't just invent them. And so the students have had an opportunity to go up to Boyd's lab. And Boyd every year invites people along with Eversource that controls, or First Light that controls the dam up at Turner's Falls to save the sea lampreys, which are now the keystone species that are the EPA is trying to save. And Biocitizen always extends the invitation to anybody who would like to come. It only takes 3 hours and we save thousands of them. And it's also an opportunity for everybody to get into the riverbed and to see how alive it is. And this is the conclusion, is that Boyd is a co-founder of the Living River School. And what we're trying to do is, and are doing, is getting kids into citizen science and scientific research. And here they're measuring the size of fish for a study that Boyd did with some Biocitizen school funding that is now being used by the US Fish and Wildlife Service and Massachusetts to get the latest data on where the fish fry live, the baby fish live, because if we can increase the size of their habitats, we will also increase the size of their populations. So that is thankfully the end of my presentation. So if anybody has any questions, I ran really quickly over this. My last comment might be this, is that we are very interested in returning to the Old Canal here, that you can see in this map from 1860, because we could establish a fishways here. We have the elevator already, but the elevator is not sufficient. It's also a very highly technological and involved process. What we would like to do is to create like a passive energy solution to this problem that would allow fish pretty much year round, although Boyd would say the fish don't go up and down the river year round. Like right now, the fish are not going up and down the river, but would allow the fish to make their way up a fish ladder that actually works, because he is capable, and other up-to-date entomologists who know fish behavior are now able to create the right conditions that will attract the fish up these. And this would be also a major tourist attraction for people. because you would be able to get very close to see the fish migrations, which you can't do with the elevator. So we'd have two things working at the same time. The Holyoke Dam still is the major cork in the Connecticut River, and we can improve upon that. We would like to help the Holyoke, Water and Gas Company do that. And so that is my conclusion. So thank you, Penny, and thank you everybody who listened. And so if you have any questions, I would love to, or have any comments, I would love to hear them.
Great. Thank you so much, Kurt. This is really good. So if anyone just wants to speak out, we want to be mindful of everyone's time. But yeah, any questions? There's one question or comment in the chat that Bill said that you could check with Jim Coran at the warehouse in Holyoke, that he has dam history and artifacts.
Oh.
So there's lots of sources in Holyoke. People have little pockets of information that.
I just wanted to go there too.
Oh yeah, it's a great place. It's a great place. Thanks, Bill, for that note.
Yeah, no problem. He has a lot of history within his the warehouse, and he has a lot of it out for display. So when you have an event there or whatever, you can see it. But being part of the parade committee, I've seen a lot of it personally, and with my father being part of the water power, I've got an interest in the dam and stuff, and he has a lot of dam historical stuff and a picture and a model mock-up of the dam when it was built. So it'd be a good source. And
yeah.
Thank you so much, because that is like the most interesting structure, and I've never actually had the courage to go or had a wedding, that I could book there. But I will, with your invitation. And
yeah.
By the way, I'm going to leave this up. So if anybody wants to send an email, there's a comment form, because I would like to continue to add to this as a public text, because it's not easy to actually collect all this information. And the reason I'm giving this little talk is that I could not find a single source that had a timeline like that.
Yeah, no, what another area that Charlie Lotsbeach, who's the park ranger at the Holyoke Heritage State Park, he has a lot of information about the South Hadley canals and how that structure worked there. So yeah, there's, like I said, there's lots of little pockets, but yeah, that timeline is really great to have it all in one place. Are there any other questions? Anybody have any other questions for Kurt?
Yeah, just one. Kurt, first of all, your talk was very enjoyable. The other fish lift for the future that you're talked about, is there any information on that I could look up?
Well, all right, so I'm going to step back. That Andy Fisk from the Connecticut River Conservancy gave a presentation a few months ago. They are active in trying to establish now a fish lift up around the Turner's Falls Dam and the Cabot Canal. There is no additional fish lift planned for the Holyoke Dam that I know of. And so what I've been talking to Boyd about, since we actually have the world's expert living in the valley on fishways, was the idea of adding another way for the fish to get up, because it is clearly a problem. All agencies and even the Holyoke Dam people acknowledge that the fish lift is doing the best it can do, but that the numbers continue to go in the wrong direction. And so I will also say that this is a global problem, that wherever you have a city where you've got these anadromous fish coming in, that they're all under threat. And that once again, Holyoke has an opportunity to be a global leader, because it was a global leader in creating the city and these canals to begin with. It was also a global leader in creating the fish lift. That was the first one in the whole world. And it was actually the first success that that anybody had ever seen for saving fish. So we're reaching now this level where we can do better. And so what we're proposing is actually something that hasn't been proposed. And we have an initiative that we're calling Earth Stewardship that we would like to invite you to join us with the American Ecological Association. That is people who are ecologists that unite in these types of situations where they want to address a global problem at a single site, where they can funnel their own energies and their grad students and their funding to come up with a solution, with the idea, if we can solve the problem here, it can be transported, to LA, to China, to Brazil, and everything. And it's what we do in this valley. That's all I can say, is that we are an amazing cultural region. Yeah.
We have another comment from Andy Morris Friedman. What books can you recommend on the history of the dam and the river? And do you like the book Reasonable Use, the People and the Environment and the State, New England, 1790 to 1930? It's a very specific title.
Thank you, Andy. I haven't actually read that. And if I shouldn't write it down right now, but if you could send me a note, I'd love that. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of the texts that I have gotten online and put them into the Biocitizen Google database and make them linkable so that you can download them. One of the texts that I have that's a very useful one was written by Mr. Barrett himself. And it's a history of the dam. And that I don't think is available in any published form. So what I have raked together for this presentation is a lot of these primary sources that are extremely difficult to get to. So within a day or two, if you will go back to this post on the Biocitizen website, there'll be a link, and you'll click it, and all of a sudden a folder will open up and you'll see all the text that I used. And if anybody has any recommendation for other texts, I would like to upload them also for the same reason, public education, because the more people who have these facts in hand, who love the fish, well, we're going to be the people who actually can finally appeal to the legislature again, for funding, and get Congressman Neal and Elizabeth Warren and Markey to let's fund Boyd Kennard's River Fish LLC and get this thing going, because the fish, they need it and we can do it. And Holyoke has another renaissance ahead of it.
I think that's a great spot to call it a night. Positive, looking to the future, and something good that we can work together towards. So thank you, Andy, so much for being here tonight with us. And thank you all for joining us. It has been live streamed, and there will be a recording of it going up on our YouTube channel, which is at YouTube, and just search on Wisteria Hearst Museum and it'll be there. So thank you again, Andy, and really enjoyed all of that information.
Thank you, Wisteria Hearst.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.